Hello and welcome to episode 118 of the Meet the Farmers podcast. I'm your host, Ben Eagle, and this is the third episode in this latest mini-series with the Food Farming and Countryside Commission. And today is all about local food, as well as public procurement, and how we can get more local food into publicly run catering operations. We'll be looking at examples of local food being promoted through regional procurement models and local sales as well, and asking what we can learn from this and how we can do more of it. I'm joined by Rosie Jack, who is manager of Bowhouse Market on the Balcaski estate in Fife, and Simon Wright, who is a food writer and restaurateur who runs Wright's Food Emporium in Carmarthenshire. Welcome to you both. Thanks so much for coming on. Can you both introduce yourselves first of all? I've given you a very brief introduction, and tell us what local food means to you. Who wants to start? Rosie?
I'll go first, I don't mind. Hello, my name is Rosie Jack, and as Ben said, I am the Bowhouse manager on Balcaski Estate in the East Lake of Fife. What we do at Bowhouse, we do so many things, but for us, Bowhouse is a space we like to talk about creating habitat. So we run food and drink markets once a month. We run a weekly e-commerce service to connect customers to local produce. And we also have about 8 food and drink businesses at Bowhouse that call our building home. And really, we are just facilitating those small businesses to make those connections with customers, grow produce, make produce, sell produce. We try and do as much as we can to connect people to the local produce and the land and show them what's in season. So we do lots of things and try and turn our hand at as much as possible.
Simon, tell us a bit about your work and again, what local means for you.
Well, we have a sort of cafe delicatessen here in West Wales. I've been living in the same area for 30 odd years and promoting local food, wanting to see the growth in local food has always been central to what we do. And we're at a real crossroads at the moment. And I suppose the interest in it has never been more heightened than it is now. As to what local means, I think it's a really good question, isn't it? Because Rosie's already mentioned some of the ways in which you can define it. There's a local 5 miles, 25 miles in Wales. Does local mean the whole of Wales? That's related to where we are at the current time as well in terms of supply and what we produce. Most of what we produce in Wales is actually processed outside of Wales. So, there's actually, in a sense, one of the biggest challenges we have in terms of local food here is actually, the supply doesn't match the demand in many ways. But also, I think the word local itself, for instance, we sell wine from the Loire that we buy direct from natural wine producers in the Loire. And I always kind of think of that as local in the sense that there's only us and the producer.
Yep.
So the story is very local to us. It's not geographically local, but so we know exactly how those things are produced and what goes into the farming. I think it's important not to get too precious about it, but to look at why is local important, and it's important for many different reasons.
You mentioned processing there, Simon, and it's something the FFCC is critically interested in, is that whole food system, looking at the food system as a whole. So let's put local into that context. And I'm interested in the reasons why you think it's important, perhaps in that wider context of transforming the food system generally. Simon?
Well, I think it's some of it's about control. It's a bottom-up approach, isn't it? You can control what goes on locally much more than you can globally. So I see it that way, that we're doing it for ourselves and we want to bring, local, great, nutritious food to local people. That, to me, is the essence of it. When you are close to the way in which something is produced, you understand how it's done, and then therefore you're able to take into account, all the outcomes, all the real costs of the food itself. And again, I think that's key, and that's something that goes hand in hand with stuff being produced locally. Shortening supply chains obviously has an impact in terms of the environment, but also it's about the health of the rural economy, particularly down here, which has seen, decades of decline as farming employs less people. There's very little secondary production going on. And it's about retaining the value. there are various statistics for how much agricultural value we retain in Wales, but it's often bandied about that it's around about 8%. Well, there's a lot of value going outside of Wales and not staying with the people who are actually producing the food.
Rosie, do you want to come back on that? And perhaps, could your model be replicated elsewhere?
I think it could be. I think we'd love that to happen. I think we're still out at the early stages of what we're doing. But yeah, if there was another Bowhouse in Wales, what a success story. That would be incredible. We'd love to see that happen. And I think that's really interesting that so much of the produce is going out of Wales to be processed. And why is that? Is it because the population has fallen, so there's not the people there to process it? What's happening? And we see that in our part of Fife as well, that the cauliflowers are being harvested in the field and then they go down south to be chopped up and cleaned and bagged and then brought back up to the local co-op, and you're thinking, hang on a minute. But because of the scale of the processing, it obviously has to be done in one place to make it all add up. It does make sense. So yeah, I think if there was lots of Bowhouses all over the country and people understood what that model was, that would be a great success story, because we still have people who turn up to Bowhouse and think, oh, is this a farm shop? Or, oh, what's going on here? And just think it's our market weekend and don't understand that actually our market weekends are just our public facing, they're just our hook to get people in. We really want people to come and meet the makers. That for us, I think that's what local is actually as well, is that you're meeting the farmer, you're meeting the producer, you're understanding the story. And yes, that producer might be from Edinburgh, that producer might be from Inverness, but they are telling their story. They know how that produce was created and they can explain it. And then hopefully that person is hooked into buying more local produce and understanding what seasonality is and, eating from the food that their community provides. So yeah, I would love to see lots of Bowhouses popping up, but too much to take on just now.
I bet. Let's focus in on the last 12 months, because clearly there has been a lot of change. What have the lockdowns and COVID done for encouraging more of us to buy local when it comes to food? Rosie, have you seen, what changes have you seen?
Yeah, we've seen massive changes, and actually I think the real turning point was when all the supermarket shelves were empty and everyone started panicking and going, I can't get this, I can't get that. And we were just like, hello, we're here, we can help. Come and speak to us. And very quickly, in the space of 3 weeks, we obviously cancelled all of our market weekends, but we couldn't just sit by and do nothing. All of our producers had things in the ground, they had things sown, they had beef being produced, they had, whiskey and barrels, they had everything going on, ready for the season, ready for the year ahead. So we very quickly worked with Open Food Network, who are an e-commerce platform, who work with producers, hubs in the middle, which we are, and then the consumers. So we set up an e-commerce site called Bowhouse Link, really to try and just support our producers, trying to give them a link to the consumers. And this has worked really well, because if we'd done nothing, many of our producers would have gone. And then when we get back up and running, we'd be looking around going, where is everyone? We can't get back because our producers have had to shut down, or they've had to scale down. They can't come to the markets. They can't produce to what they were in 2019. So Bowhouse Link has allowed us to connect both those parties together, and we're just the middleman, again, facilitating that movement of produce to the community. And people have really enjoyed it and really loved it, and we're still going. We've, I can't remember how many weeks we've done, but when I last checked, we've sent about 3,000 boxes out the door since April last year. We do a weekly rotation of seasonal produce. That's what we talk about all the time, is what's in season, what you can get, send out recipes. And people have really liked it. And because people have had disposable income, because they're not going on holiday, they're not going out to restaurants, well, they weren't back, a couple months ago, they're not doing all these big trips. They've got this income, and also they're really bored. So they're thinking, I want a nice meal tonight. I'm going to buy some lovely beef and do something interesting with it. And then they're hooked and they want to find out more. So it's really exciting. And it's also changed people's perception of us. We're not just a market weekend once a month. And I think from other people I've spoken to across Scotland and hopefully across the UK, they're seeing the benefits of it, but it's just how we ride that wave and keep it going.
Absolutely. I mean,
That's the trick of
Simon,
it.
what for you will be the long-term impact of COVID from a food perspective?
Well, our experience has been almost a low carbon copy of what Rosie said. You know, our first instinct actually is because we were mostly restaurant based before COVID came. We had a shop already, but the big worry for us was that some of the people we use as suppliers, we were buying a third, even a half of their produce. And suddenly we didn't have the capacity to do that because we had no market. So we had to rearrange things in a similar way and keep the supply streams going through click and collect. So we started making things that people could come and collect and bake at home or whatever. And that's continued through. And we started doing veg boxes from our main fruit and veg supplier locally as well. So those things have been really important. I think there's been some amazing structural changes in the last 12 months. We were already at the crossroads, weren't we, before COVID came along? You know, we were going to have to make big decisions post Brexit.
Yeah.
We're probably at that point of massive opportunity and massive challenge, and those things sometimes come together. What I'm more confident about, despite having gone through this awful pandemic, is that we're coming out the other side of it looking in the right direction at the crossroads. The whole coalition of people working in this field is a lot closer together than it was a year ago. Because, there's across the UK, there's always been lots of good work going on, but it's often been piecemeal, duplicated, not learning enough from other people's experiences, etc. So that, I think, has been a huge leap forward. I think there has been some change definitely in public buying habits, but I don't think we can rest on the laurels of that. As Rosie says, we've got an awful lot of work to do. There's a more radical feeling out there at the moment, even in the institutions. And I think that's really important, is that, I've been dealing with Welsh Government, with local authorities for years on these subjects. And some of the solutions have always been marginal and been unprepared to take on the heavy lifting, really. And now we're talking about much more radical approaches.
Yeah, you mentioned some things there. What was holding back more localized food systems in the UK as a whole?
Well, certainly, I mean, it's easier for me to speak for Wales, because I know there's initiatives going on elsewhere. And, Open Food Network it has been a great help in that respect. Distribution is a massive issue. So we need more collaboration. We need more cooperative processing. We need more cooperative packaging and distribution. We're very lucky in Wales, and in West Wales in particular. We have some of the really great thinkers about regenerative farming and food systems down here. Patrick Holden lives down here.
Yep.
Pete Seggers at Blind Camel Farm. Quite extraordinary. And I keep saying to them, after all these years, their time has really come now. So we need to be utilising people like that to, take this opportunity, collaborate. And that's what we're trying to do in Carmarthenshire and South West Wales at the moment.
What would help you, Rosie, and people like you up in Scotland?
I think in Scotland, for producers, we have a lot of red tape. So many of our producers, they're small scale, they have an amazing idea, and they want to sell their produce to the customers. But then EHO or environmental health, all these people come along and go, that is a big no-no because of X, Y, and Z. But it's legal in England or it's legal in other countries, and it's so frustrating. And because when they're small producers, they hit this wall and they go, well, I can't get around it. I'm a new producer, I'm really passionate about this, but I don't know legally what I'm allowed to do. So I think for me, that's what I see from a producer side of things. And then from a consumer side of things, it maybe is things like price, because they're going into the supermarkets and they're seeing things that, reduced and things like that. But actually the cost of production for this good quality produce in Scotland, England or Wales, is this, which means the price needs to be more. And actually when they try it, they're going to realise the benefit of it being not only blinking delicious, but really good value for money and healthy for you. And the knock-on effect socially and economically they can have by eating that produce in their area. So singing that song constantly, we are always doing, and so many people are, and you can really feel that energy within groups like we've talked about Open Food Network, the Soil Association, all these other groups that are doing amazing work. But I would say for us up here, it's red tape and again, routes to market.
Okay. Simon, you were nodding away to Rosie's answer there. Do you want to come back on that?
I'm just really pleased that Rosie's highlighted the whole red tape issue. It's kind of often ignored. So it happens in Wales as well. We've got devolved government, not quite as many powers as you have, Rosie, but still quite a lot, and especially in relation to agriculture and food safety. And there's no real understanding of the impact of what they do on individual businesses. The food safety structure is just not fit for purpose anymore. The academic underpinning is completely out of date. So on the one hand, we're learning about the microbiome, and this is the biggest advance we've had in medical science in our lifetimes, maybe in any lifetime, to be honest. We start to understand that. But at the same time, we've got, the same nonsensical rules coming from EHOs. To bless them, they're trying to do the best job. But, they're basically a tick box organization, and they're watching their backsides all the time. That's what they're really worried about, if something's going to go wrong. Now, even that is kind of, fantasy land in a sense, because if something's going to go wrong, it generally goes wrong in industrial scale food production, not in, somebody who's trying to produce unpasteurized cheese. On the one hand, the government is, look, we need more jobs, we need more economic activity. And on the other hand, there are people who can't actually do anything because the officers that are charged with dealing with them just aren't able to really understand the processes. And it always favors large producers because it's very easy for them to deal with these things. So we've got a real battle on our hands with that one, but we're going to win that one. We're going to take it to Welsh Government. We're going to explain to them that if you don't, if we go on like this, there is no point in you having innovations centres and, whatever it is for local food producers. We've got to work a lot harder at making the politicians, sometimes not even the politicians, I would say more the officials, understand this and make our food safety regime fit for purpose, because it's a major block at the moment on improving our food system.
Let's turn towards public procurement, and I'm mostly turning towards Wales as an example here, and partly why we wanted to get Simon on the show. Simon, where you are in Carmarthenshire, there has been increased effort to link local producers with public procurement programs, but obviously you've had a lot of discussions on many things with Welsh Government. Can you run us through how this has worked first of all, but perhaps the positives and the drawbacks?
Largely, it's come from the foundational economy approach that the parts of Welsh Government want to take. So it's almost beyond agriculture and food. It's the Preston model, spending money in the local area, stimulating the local economy, etc., etc. That's been the real driver behind this in Wales, and applying that to food. And what we've done in Carmarthenshire over the past year is we've had some money from Welsh Government for the Foundational Economy Challenge Fund to start developing ideas as how do we get more local food on the public plate. Now, we've all heard that a million times before. There have been God knows how many initiatives on that. And so what we're trying to do in Carmarthenshire is get to the real root of it and look at the real structural problems that are in the way of achieving that, and actually take some action to get over them. And to do it on a large scale. I mean, the last 12 months has been a lot of learning. It's been a lot of talking to stakeholders. Let's take one of the basic fundamentals here. Let's say that we switch all school food and hospital food in southwest Wales, where we are, over to local supply. Well, obviously we can't, because there isn't local supply. Fruit and veg is the biggest problem there. Now, there is no reason why those things can't be grown down here. And in fact, they increasingly are again. I mean, you only got to go back 150 years and we were doing all sorts down here. We were growing rye and grain. It is starting to happen again, but the supply side is nowhere near of a scale to meet the demand at the moment. So that's a massive issue in itself. So, you can't just say, because what tends to happen with these schemes is they'll be relatively small scale, not involve very much money, 20 or 30 grand on a grant or something. Somebody will set up a food hub and it's wonderful, but it's not really making it, it's not enough to make structural change. Public procurement is not the answer to everything. It's not, that in itself is not big enough to solve the problem, but it is big enough to be a massive catalyst.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do here in Comanche and with the Public Service Board is get us into a position where we will set targets for these things. And there are some very famous examples of this that are, just slightly off at a tangent, like Copenhagen, for example. And we've been talking to Copenhagen about their approach from the early 2000s to 2015, where they went to they've got 90% of the public places organic now from 5%. In a 15-year period, so less than 15-year period. So quite extraordinary. So it's that kind of ambition that we need and those kind of targets. And then you have to look and say, okay, I'm very much of the opinion that we've got to start looking at the big pictures. Where do we want to get to? And let's, because what tends to happen, especially when it comes to public policy, is people look for the chinks of light in between the existing barriers to get anything done. And that will only get you a small distance. What we need to do is to say, okay, where is it? What sort of food system is it we want to create in the area? And to do that, you've got to bring in everybody at base stage, including everybody that's cynical, including the farmers who've been told to farm another way for 40 years and are now 50 years and now being told to farm a different way again. Actually, the biggest barrier we have of all is cynicism. All those people in local authorities who've been working on these things over years and now exhausted and seeing that all it does is cause them more work and there's no outcome. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that we've been looking at so far. And the next steps are to put some big things in place. So we're looking at some large pilot projects where we can start to develop collaborative distribution, collaborative packaging. It's so far away from where it needs to be. You've got to look at every aspect. So school menus, for instance, it's not just what they buy, which, is as bad as it ever was in many ways in terms of where stuff comes from. But it's also the fact that there's no change to the menus according to the seasons, and the menus don't reflect what's available locally. So there's all that work that needs to be done. There's the status of the people working in canteens in schools and hospitals. They need better skills. They need to be working with better materials, and the status of their jobs needs to rise because they're doing incredibly important work that they need to be proud of. So the approach we've taken is to kind of like, I suppose it's kind of like no stone unturned kind of approach. Say like, look, if we're going to do this, we need to do all of it. Yeah. We can't ignore one piece of the jigsaw and work on it elsewhere. So we've been at the strategic stage, let's put it that way, and we're about to move straight into the action phase. And that's going to mean lots of ways of finding funds, trying to bring local authorities together to work together, channeling resources, and starting to make a real difference, hopefully.
Let's talk about sort of the stigmas behind local food, because there might be a perception that it's more expensive to source locally. How can local be the affordable option, Rosie?
It's something that we have all the time, where people come into the market weekend and they go, oh wow, that's amazing, but that's quite expensive for a ribeye steak. But then explaining why it's that price, one, because that's the cost production, two, because that's what the farmer needs to get to, survive, and the butcher, and it's aged, it's 8 weeks age, it's grass-fed, the process. Trying to explain that in a 30-second pitch to a consumer, when they can go down to, Co-op down the road and get something vacuum packed that's dry aged, is a typical one. So for me, I do see price as an issue, but that is, again, consumer-led, that we have to have food for all types of people that are on different wages. We have to have food for these people. Completely understand that. But there needs to be other ways to connect people who are on these different wage brackets to local produce. It's a tricky one, I think, and I think what else is stopping, I think how geographically potentially stopping. We've talked about routes to market. Other things around the stigmas around seasonal food is that it maybe can be looked at as elitist a little bit. that it's not in the real world. And again, some farmers will say this, oh, it's that's not in the real world, that's not going to make money. So I think all these things make it difficult, and there are underlying grumbles that I think eventually people will see beyond that. But they're the sort of things that I notice day to day.
Yeah. Simon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a massive question, isn't it? And I think it does go to education. I think food does need to be at the centre of the curriculum. We've got a new curriculum coming in here in Wales, which is going to be much more practical based, less target driven, et cetera, et cetera. So that should be food should be the vehicle for teaching a lot of that, in my view. So we've got to do some intensive work on trying to make that happen in Wales. It is about familiarity with what people eat. So, I do a bit of broadcasting. I've done a lot of programs with children, and I've gone home and eaten with them and see that nobody sits around the table anymore. We need cooking in schools, because we know that if kids learn to cook, their affection for food grows. And that really, I mean, this is what you need, is people to fall back in love with food and have respect for it. So, that's a difficult thing to achieve. But it's far from impossible. I think on price, one of the issues we have is that people just see a carrot as a carrot, a ribeye steak as a ribeye steak. And there's a part of the population that will discern the difference. That's not always based on income. At our place, I mean, clearly, if you come here, you're gonna spend more money than you would going into a supermarket and buying the same amount of veg or stuff. But we have plenty of people that come in here that are on relatively restricted incomes that choose to prioritize good food in their spending. That's not to criticize those who don't, but it just shows that that it is available to. Does depend on your priorities. And secondly, what really annoys me here is the idea that we've got to produce cheap, poor food, highly processed, with the worst health outcomes, is all we can afford to give to the poorest people. Well, to me, that's not an acceptable and sustainable argument. We have to have great food for everybody. Then you're into the whole, look at the health outcomes from that and what they cost us as a nation. We still pay for these things. We just pay for them in taxation. We pay to clear up the mess that we've kicked into the long grass for short-term price gain.
Let's finish with a message to the politicians. In your views, do the various governments in the UK, and let's perhaps focus for you in particular, some of you in Wales, Rosie, for you in Scotland, do they need to be doing more? And if so, what could they be doing? What would your message be to them? Let's start in Scotland. Rosie.
I think it goes back to education, and I think it goes back to the curriculum. I don't know a great detail of the Scottish curriculum, if I'm being truly honest, but I think it goes back to what the consumer wants, and that's from the ground up, with children eating food, and then again digging a hole, feeling the soil, smelling the soil, understanding the process, and going, oh my goodness, I could do this as well, feeling passionate about it. I also think we talked about different careers. It's about showing children, actually, you could have an amazing career in farming, in hospitality, in food procurement, and making those things desirable, those kind of careers worthwhile, and something you'd want to do. So I think the government could do lots to change that. That is a long road, and I think they could do even more, but be quite radical with it. In terms of right now, what could happen, I think you're right, we're at a crossroads. We're hopefully leaving COVID, and hopefully we can ride this wave of consumers finding local produce and wanting to support it and wanting to eat in this way.
And Simon, a message to the Welsh government and the UK government from you.
I mean, what we need in Wales in particular is an overarching food and farming plan. We don't have that. So food is touched on in education, in health, in agriculture, almost every division of government. And as a consequence of almost, it doesn't get the full attention it needs. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful going forward. We've got a new government in Cardiff. They definitely are committed to the right things. We have a climate change minister now. It's getting that understanding through to government, and that commitment that we need to look at food in the round, across the board, in all areas of government, and everything has to be pulling in the same direction. At the moment, we're only a small country, but we still manage to work in silos, and that has to end. And I think it's probably the same for the whole of the UK, really.
Well, a huge amount in today. Thank you so much to you both. That is all we have time for. A massive thank you to my guests today, Rosie, Jack, and Simon Wright. Next time, it's the final episode in this mini-series with the FFCC, and we'll be talking about direct sales, veg and meat boxes, and I'll be joined by Peter Grieg from Piper's Farm in Devon, Chen Wilson from Growing Communities in London, and John McCormick from Helens Bay Organic Farm in County Down. So I hope you can join me then. But until then, have a great week.